Man, I definitely would have wound up bound up in the floor in that had you not moved it. So, well, welcome out. How's everybody doing this morning? Everybody doing all right? You good? Oh, that was terrible. Did you guys know we have coffee in our lobby? Y'all should try that sometime. Yeah. No, man, I'm glad you guys are here. And I get the feeling, though, right? For real. I really do. Like, I woke up feeling exactly how you feel. Something is in the air. I think I don't know, but it's the end of February already. Anybody blown away? It seems like yesterday we were taking down Christmas decorations, and then it's like March is here, Easter, boom, right around the corner, the kids are going back to school. Anybody feel that way, right? That's how I felt this year's gone. Although January, for some reason, seems like it's 3 months long. But then after you're on the other side of it, it's all good. But anyway, so here's the deal. We have covered a lot of ground and have got a lot of ground to cover this morning. So I'm going to jump right into things. We ended part of our series last week, and I'll talk about that. But I just want to remind you as a whole what we're doing this year. Because if you're here and this is your very first Sunday with us, man, you came at a really good time because we're starting our next sort of leg of this bigger series. And our bigger series that we're in is something called Cover to Cover. We are preaching and teaching through, reading through the entire Bible over the course of this year as a church. And if that sounds aggressive, it's only because it is. It's super aggressive. Actually, next week, we're going to get our first double booking. And so we're going to see how that works. I'm hoping that it doesn't come off the wheels. But we're going to look at Judges and Ruth in one Sunday next week. And so, yeah, and that's nothing. We've got a few weeks with 5 books crammed into it. So if you do the math, right, we gave Genesis 2 weeks. And so that means 66 books, something has to give, right? And so, but we're making our way, reading through this. And I encourage you, if you haven't started the Bible reading plan, it's not too late, man. Just pick up with where we are right now. Where are we starting? Where's tomorrow? I'm completely off. I'm actually... But where we're at, Deuteronomy, starting Deuteronomy, right? Okay, are we starting Deuteronomy? We should be midway through Deuteronomy. Starting Deuteronomy today? Holy smokes. Okay, so I'm in Judges, but only because I got to write sermons for this stuff, right? And so, yeah, all right, so you guys are in Deuteronomy, so just pick up with where we're at. It's not a big deal. If you've missed a bunch or you've fallen behind, just start fresh with where we are, and hit me up afterwards if you want one of our Bible reading plans. I'll get that to you, right? But I said every week I wanted us to do 3 things. First, we're going to look at our story overview. That is, what is the arrangement and what is this story and how it's put together? What is it trying to communicate? This deep life truth that was true not only to the audience who first read the words, but is true to us and life-changing for us as well. So what's the story overview? And then I said we're going to have this teach a man to fish moment every week because I want you guys to know how to read your Bible well for yourself, confidently for yourself. And man, let's just be real. The Bible is difficult. It's written in languages that you don't read, from a culture that you've never existed in a part of the world that most of you have never been to before, right? And so, man, let's just be real. Nobody read any apocalyptic literature this week, did you? Anybody? No. Okay. So, man, there's just even forms of literature that we're not even used to reading, and so reading the Bible takes a set of skills and takes some things. And so, every week we've looked at these study concepts, and then finally we've looked at these pictures of Christ and pictures of the gospel. That the Bible is weaving a story behind the story, and that's the part that's powerful and has the ability to change our lives. And so every week we've seen how Christ or how the gospel is being pictured through the different narratives or characters or pieces of poetry that we're looking at. Everybody doing good? Everybody all right? That's what we've been doing. And for the last few weeks, we worked through the Torah. What does Torah stand for? Anybody remember? Wait, say it, so I heard it. Law, right? We talked about law, and we said it's really easy to think that when we think law, to think those 613 thou shalt and thou shalt not. So you may grow up thinking that. I grew up, and when I heard the word law, I thought thou shalt not, murder, thou shalt not do this, or it's something about some rituals, or something about the priest, or something like that. And so I grew up thinking that it was only about these commands, and actually, man, what we see in the law, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, it isn't just a bunch of commands, it isn't lists, it isn't a checklist for us, it's a story full of 36 or more different characters, different narratives, different stories about how God intervenes in the lives of His people. And actually, at the end of the day, it's really concerned with communicating some things about who God is and who we are in light of that. And that's where the story takes on power for our lives. It isn't characters that we emulate, and we're going to talk about this again today. It's actually the law is comprised not only of commands, but all of the various stories, characters, rituals, and even the architecture. All of these are working together to weave this story about who God is and who we are in light of that. And I said, if it's not about those commands, if it's actually about this story, then I said our obedience to the law is not based on this obligation to a set of commands, but is our natural response to the love of a God who first loved us. Because that's what the story's telling. Like over and over again, man, that God moved towards his people when they had just sinned in the garden. God moved towards his people when they were in slavery in Egypt. Man, God continually moves towards and works for the benefit of his people. Because why? Because they had done some good stuff? No, man, because of who God is. Because God just loved them. And it was based on his grace and his mercy alone. And over again, we see God step in the lives of his people, intervening in their story of this God who first loved us. And our response to this is that we would love him back. And that's how Moses actually concludes the whole Torah. Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 and 5. It's the Shema. Hear, O Israel. Listen and understand who the Lord your God is, the Lord who has intervened in your story, who has been working to save you out of Egypt and save you from yourself for decades, actually 400 years now. God has been at work in your story. Know this God and respond in kind to the love that he has had for you. And we talked about that in terms of marriage, man. That's kind of how it works in marriage. We don't obey the husband or the wife law. We love and respond in love to our spouse because it's out of love. And how we act and what we do is based in that, not in some list of commands, and we should see it the same way in the Bible. You guys doing good? That's Torah. That's as far back as I'm going in Torah, because we're moving on this week to the historical books of the Old Testament. Historical books, right? So in this sub-series, we're going to talk through Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, and 1st and 2nd Chronicles. Now, here's the deal. If you know a little bit about your Bible, you know that I left a few historical books out of that. Primarily Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. And sometimes Daniel gets lumped in there, but because it's mostly prophecy, we're gonna leave that in the prophetic books. But what we're going to be concerned primarily with is something called Pre-Exilic History. You good with that? Pre-exilic history. So before the nation of Israel was exiled off into Babylon and Assyria and all that good stuff. And by the time we get to 2nd Chronicles, you're going to understand all of that really, really well. So don't stress about that. I'm not going to go too deeply into that. But this is what we're doing. So here's the question that I want to open up with this morning. Why do we read history? This is the part where you talk in church. Why do we read history? So we learn from it. So don't repeat it, right? Is that everybody good with that? Is that why we read? It's why we read history, is we learn from it. And so just as a show of hands, how many of you grew up seeing the Old Testament as this list of characters or stories that we either need to emulate or avoid? Because if that's what history is, then that's what that means, right? These are the good guys and these are the bad guys, and we should have a heart like David, or I'm supposed to avoid the mistakes of Saul, or I'm supposed to seek the wisdom of Solomon or something like that, right? And just to be completely honest with you, I believe there is some truth in that view of biblical history, that we need to read it to not make the same mistakes or learn from it. Not much truth, but some truth, right? And so it's kind of a trick question, and I'm sorry for that. Actually, the reason that we read biblical history has to do primarily with something called the Zeigernick Effect. Everybody say the Zeigernick Effect. Zeigernick Effect. Okay, so it's actually a really interesting piece of psychology. And here's what the Zeigernick Effect says. It says that our brains abhor the vacuum of non-completion, and they actually crave resolution. Our brains crave resolution. And I could explain this, but I think the best way is to just show you a video. So here's a video.
Ever?
Yeah.
Give me a break. Give me a break. Break me off a piece of that. I am totally blanking. What is the thing?
Nobody tell him.
What? No, why?
You got it. You're so close.
Break me off a piece of that. Applesauce.
Break me out a piece of that applesauce. I don't think that.
Piece of that Chrysler car.
Nope.
Football cream.
Okay. It's football cream. It's football cream.
Is it football cream? Is it football cream? All right, on three, right? Break me off a piece of that. Yes, all right. So you guys know, you know the thing, right? But it's like that moment where it's like dun 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 dun. Oh no, you can't, right? But the tension, I want to build the tension, right? It's like dun dun, and then your brain absolutely is like craving resolution. And here's the deal. Yeah, here's the next page. And it's used in everything. It's used in like, can you guys see that? Okay. Hi again, Sam. Complete your profile. It's at 80%. Here's the deal, man. Marketing uses this like all the time. Can I just tell you that 80% number is completely arbitrary and fabricated? It's not real, right? But what they want out of you is they want you to come back and give them a little more information. This is something called dark patterns, actually. It's how to force users to like do something that maybe they don't want to do, like go sign up for that $5 monthly recurring service or something like that. And do this such a powerful tool because our brains like hate the fact that there's this little section that isn't filled in with a green line right there, and it's 80%. So close. You're so close to 100%, right? So there's just, I'll sign up for the little thing. It's $5 a month. It ain't that bad, right? And then boop, it goes over. And you think like, how silly is that? But it works, y'all. Like it absolutely is this very, very powerful tool, right? And like I said, when you see this concept, you'll notice it's everywhere. I think of composers in movies and stuff like that, man. Like Hans Zimmer. You guys know who Hans Zimmer is. He were like Interstellar, I think, and like, did you do Interstellar? I think he did Interstellar, right? But anyways, like, dude, Hans Zimmer is like the master of this, or old horror films, how it would build up, and it would lead to this tension of non-completion, and your brain is so craving, you lean out over the edge, and then boom, like the scary thing happens, or whatever the case is, the villain is revealed, and all of a sudden now, like it has invested you in the story, and that's what the Zeigernick Effect really does. It invests you in, it like pulls you into the story, and here's how this has to do with the Old Testament, because I want to ask you a question, and I just want you all to say no. All right, you ready for it? Hey, do you guys know the story of Jesus? No. Okay, well, let me tell you about the story of Jesus. Jesus lived like 2,000 years ago, and he was this itinerant like carpenter and Jewish rabbi who died for your sins and rose on the third day. Here's the deal. You don't know about that story. Is that story wild? Y'all, that story is wild. That's what we believe, man. That's like at the roots of Christianity. Can I just tell you, like, how wild that story is? That's the thing that we hold like near and dear. And like, why do we understand that? Well, we understand that because we've seen Genesis 1, 2, and 3, and we know what's at stake. We know what sin is. We know we know that we have been separated from a life-giving relationship with our Creator, and Jesus came to like reconcile us back into that. Like nothing makes sense without this. And through the Old Testament or through the Torah, we've learned some things like, I don't know, man. We've learned some things like what sin is and like what redemption looks like and all these things, and it sets up this thing. And we're about to go into these historical books, and we're going to meet these kings, right? And guess what? They all stink. Every one of them do. They're all terrible. And we come to the list. And like, here's the deal, man. Like, we really, really, our hearts long for a better king, don't they? That's why politics is such a huge thing, man. You think your guy is right, and you're certain of it. You think that if this guy can just be elected in or can be, given free reign to do his thing, and like it's because you've defined good and evil for yourself, and you like if he can get in place, like, dude, all of our dreams will be realized. Like it's going to be great. It's going to just be heaven on earth, and it never happens that way, right? And then there's an entirely other group of people who believe the complete opposite thing of that you do about what politics should look like, and they're hoping for a king as well. And if you're kind of standing back over it, you're like, yeah, we do need a better king. We need a king that can unite people, that can come and like bring true resolution, all this stuff. And so here's the deal: the Gospel of Matthew opens up. What does Matthew do? Matthew gives us a list of these kings that were a bunch of duds. And you're like, well, maybe it was Saul. And it's like, you find out like 3 pages into Saul's story that it ain't Saul. Like, he ain't the guy, right? And then maybe it's David, right? Like, maybe David is the guy. Now, here's the deal. You wouldn't let David around your kids, right? Like, you wouldn't let David come have dinner at your house. I promise you. Like, King David, right? No, he's not the guy. Or Solomon or anything. Do they go off the rails? And so you're left and longing with this expectancy that like, man, that we need a better king. And Matthew says you absolutely do. And here he is. It's the gospel, the euangelion of Jesus. Man, you know what a gospel is? That's not a Christian term, actually. A gospel is an old, like, Greek term that is about the proclamation of the birth of a new king. There is good news because a new king has been born. This is the gospel of Jesus Christ, man. And so it completes this thing. Here's another one, man. Like, we're going to talk today about the occupation of the promised land. Spoiler alert, they don't do it, right? They never come to fully possess this land that God had promised them. And Jesus is on the scene, and there was all these people looking for Jesus to come in and to complete the story, but they had finished the thing like football cream. They were looking for the wrong thing, man. And Jesus comes in, and he says, no, I absolutely am going to lead you into this promised land. It just doesn't look anything like you thought it was going to look. Like, I have to deal with this spiritual thing that got you kicked out of the promised land in the first thing. If that kingdom, if God's kingdom and me as your king is ever going to be good news, I've got to deal with that thing in your heart first for that to be good news. So man, it's like it sets up this like craving resolution, like this thing that just craves resolution in our mind. That's why we read books of history. And here's what it has to do with us. We're going to come to these stories here in a little bit, right? We're going to come to these like pretty famous stories, like David and Goliath is a pretty good one. You guys like David and Goliath, right? And what we're tempted to do, if this is about emulating or avoiding things, then we're likely to insert ourselves into the story in ways in which we have no business being inserted into the story. Right? Like, here, spoiler alert, you're not David. Right? Like, there's no stones big enough or whatever. Like, I don't care what book you've read. You're not David in that story. You're the Israelites wetting their collective pants on the hillside. You need a better David to come and save and rescue you. That's where you fit in the story. And dude, all throughout the Old Testament, it sets up story after story, man. And this resolution that is like this lingering, here, I guess I should just stick with my notes, right? We read biblical history, set up a lingering vacuum that only Jesus can resolve because it is the power of the gospel that can transform our lives. Not our emulation of seemingly noble actions or characters from the narrative. That's why we read biblical history. You guys have a lot of history to read over the next few weeks, right? Next few months. We got a lot to make our way through. But in the longest introduction that hasn't even touched the Bible we're in, let's get started in the book of Joshua, all right? So that's history. Joshua is history. We're getting started in the book of Joshua, right? And Joshua is arranged in these four major movements centered around the land of Canaan. So, here, just briefly recap. God has brought the Israelites out of Egypt, went to the base of Mount Sinai. God gives them the law. They spend about a year there building a tabernacle that they're going to carry with them in the wilderness. They leave out of there and immediately get into the wilderness and begin to rebel against God. And they send some spies in the land. And they're chickens, man, and they don't like follow through. They don't trust God that He's going to lead them in victoriously into the land. And so He's like, all right, fine, I will honor your decision to wander this wilderness. If you don't go in, if you don't want to go in, I'm not going to force you. I'm going to let you go and wander around. So He does, and He lets an entire generation die in the wilderness. And then He brings them back to the edge. And the book of Deuteronomy is this new nation of Israel. Right? These kids, when they came out of Egypt, they're standing on the edges of the Jordan River, poised and ready to walk into the promised land. And Moses says, here's what you need to remember. I'm going to give you a few things, right? And he restates and he retells the law, right? Tells their story. Again, it isn't just commands. He tells their story and says, don't forget who God is and what He's done and what it looks like to live faithfully with Him in the land. And so he goes, and they're ready to walk in, and that's where the book of Joshua picks up. Moses is taken up on the mountain. He looks into the land. He dies. Joshua is the new leader, and then boom, Joshua 1 starts, right? And here's how chapters 1 through 5. So I told you it's arranged into four major sections around the land of Canaan. So chapters 1 through 5 are about the preparation to enter into the land. The section begins with the commissioning of Joshua. Joshua 1:1. This is a big deal. Now it came about after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord, that the Lord spoke to Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses' servant, saying, y'all, this is a big deal. Up to this point, God hasn't spoke to like anyone else. With very, very rare exceptions, Moses has been the guy that God has spoken with as he has led the people out. But all of a sudden now, like Joshua's leadership is confirmed as God begins to speak to him and to direct and guide him, right? And look at what he says. This is Joshua 1, 6 through 9. Be strong, courageous. That's good, right? About to go into war. This is really, really good stuff. Be strong and courageous, for you shall give this people possession of the land which I swore to their fathers to give them. Only be strong and very courageous. Be careful to do all according to the law which Moses my servant commanded you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left. Now, if you have your Bible and you're like tracking along, circle, underline, highlight that, that's a big deal. Do not turn from the right to the left. You want to live faithfully in this land, you have to walk this sort of narrow path, right? This book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do according to all that is written in it. When you will make, when you will make your way prosperous, then you will have success. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not tremble or be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. All right, look back over the law, not just the commands. Look at how God has been faithful and realize that He desires to continue this type of relationship with you. Like, I know it looks scary. I know there are nations in the land that look like they could like take you out, and they've been trained and they've got an actual military, and you guys are just a bunch of former slaves. But trust me in this. Like, it's going to be okay, right? So that's the commissioning of Joshua. We also get in this section, these first 5 chapters, a lot that happens here. We get Rahab. Joshua sends a couple of spies back into the land. Honestly, seemed like a dangerous move to me after the last time they sent spies into the land, right? But he sends a couple of spies in the land, and Rahab, a citizen of the city, like trusts God and brings them into her house and hides them so that they're not like captured and killed. And then she asks to be like saved when they come into the city, right? This is pretty awesome. Rahab is one of the few non-Israelite women in the lineage of the Messiah. Rahab is called out in Hebrews chapter 11, this great hall of faith. And actually in the book of James, Rahab is the only person that is set beside Abraham about how our faith and our works work together. That's a big deal, man. That's like a huge deal, right? So we get Rahab. We get the story of the crossing of the Jordan River, which is awesome. I encourage you to like do a study over that. In fact, go back to Exodus 14 and 15 and do a study comparatively between that and chapter 3 of the book of Joshua, man. You see some really neat stuff about the crossing of the Red Sea and the crossing of the Jordan River. We just don't have time for that. They set up some memorial stones as they get to the other side of the Jordan River as a reminder of God's faithfulness. They also, this is the point in the story where they circumcised the entire nation. This was a symbol and sign of the faithfulness to God's covenant. And then that section closes off as we meet the commander of the Lord's army. You guys doing okay? You doing all right? That's a lot. I totally get that, right? It can all be summed up in this one verse, though. Here's this entire section can be summed up in this. Joshua 3, verse 5, he says, Then Joshua said to the people, Consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you. Consecration is the act of purposefully setting aside something in worship to and in service of God. And here's the deal. We see the same statement. We see it in Exodus 19 before God comes down on Mount Sinai. God's about to come down in His presence, and Moses tells the people, consecrate yourself, for tomorrow the Lord is going to do wonders among you. He does it before God gives them meat. I believe that's in Numbers chapter 11. God's about to rain quail down on the camp. He's about to do this miraculous sign. He says, before this happens, I want you to consecrate yourselves. And that is to realize who God is and trust Him for your provision. This is what I want for you, right? And so They do this, we're led to believe, because God shows up and parts the waters, and they walk through the next day. And then they do something strange. They set up these memorial stones on the other side. There are about 4 different points in the book of Joshua where people set up these memorial stones, representing the people's recognition, worship, and dedication to God, right? And here's what they're doing. I think maybe the best way to explain it is a story. About 7 years ago, I think it was, we knew that church planting was going to be what was coming next in our story. We still lived down in Florida at that time, so maybe 8 years ago now. I don't know, is it 8 years ago? It's a long time ago. 8 years ago now. And it's funny because I had all of these pictures and these ideas about what it was going to look like and how that was going to work and all these things. And at multiple points in that journey, everything seemed to kind of fall apart at the seams. And but it only felt that way to me. Looking back on it now, it's oh my gosh, I am so thankful that things worked out the way that you ever had those moments where you look back over something that maybe in the moment it seemed terrible. It seemed dude, this is the end of my story. This is whatever the case, this is the worst thing that's ever happened. And all of a sudden, maybe months, years even later, you look back and you see that, man, God was working powerfully in my story. And so what I've had to do is there's been these really pointed moments where God has shown his hand in our story. And I've had to hang on to those as I've thought back, right? I'm telling you, nothing made me question, is this the right thing? A global pandemic kicking off the year. We were separating the military in May of 2020. And we hadn't even started this thing yet. And I just remember one night, Danielle, I was sitting there stressed over it. And Danielle's just remember back. Remember back to all of the things and the ways in which God has shown up in our story. God didn't lead us out here to let us drown. Dude, so we did. We launched off into the darkness, and we took that step. And it wasn't really darkness. I mean, it wasn't really a blind step of faith because, man, I have these pillars of remembrance of how God has shown up in the past when we've done this over and over and over again. Dude, even when things aren't looking like they're going to be okay, God still has shown up over and over again in our story. And here's the deal, man. Maybe just as a practical outworking of this, I don't know how many of you guys keep a prayer journal, but man, I would really encourage that. Over this next year, just begin to write the things down that you're asking God for. And then a year later, I'll tell you what, a year from now, go back into that thing and begin to highlight the ways in which God showed up. That's what erecting a pillar of memorial looks like in our lives today. It's God's going to show up in some ways. And if we're not tracking, if we're not intentional about capturing that moment, if we're not intentional about setting this thing up to remember who God is and how he's worked in our story, then man, we can miss some big things. Dude, it provides an opportunity for us to live in faithfulness and certainty of who God is, right? So I think said another way, is that we're supposed to live in hopeful expectation of what God will do based off of what you know to be true of him. Chapter 6 through 12 detail the entry and conquest of the land. There's 31 different cities that are mentioned in this section as you guys get into it here in a couple weeks. The 31 different cities that they go in and they march against, but really we see two of them given in detail. Anybody know what the two stories are that we get in real detail? Remember? Jericho. Jericho's one of them. Do you remember the other one? How do you say the other one even? Let me just give you a hint. Anybody know? Ai. It is. It's Ai. Yeah, that's how you say it. I had to go look it up this week because I've said it wrong for a while, and so I had to go actually look it up this week. It's Ai. And here's the deal: we get these two stories in detail, and then all of the rest, this huge campaign that actually took years to happen. We get nothing. We get nothing from it. And so I think what we're supposed to do is we're supposed to stop and we're supposed to zoom in and look sort of comparatively at these two stories. And what we see is this really, really neat thing. That when the Israelites cross the Jordan River, the manna stops. So God was feeding them every single. They didn't have to worry about where they got their food. They didn't have to worry about where they got their water. They didn't have to worry about working for God, for them to provide for themselves. God has taken care of them this entire journey, and now they cross the Jordan River, and all of that stops. Was God not taking care of them any longer? They're fired up back there, man. Adam's doing an illustration back there, so he probably did the thing that looked like magic to them. So anyways, that's what they're doing. But anyways, no, God wasn't God was still providing for them, but just the way in which he was providing was changing in this moment. Like, I'm going to provide for you through this good land that I'm bringing you in to possess, right? And then we get this weird little detail in chapter 6 before the Battle of Jericho, right? The city shall be under the bands. This is Joshua 6, 17 through 19. This city, Jericho, shall be under the bands. God is like telling them what the battle is going to look like and how they're going to march against the city. It and all that is in it belongs to the Lord. Only Rahab the harlot and all who are among her in her house shall live, because she had hid the messengers whom we sent. But as for you, Israelites, those of you fighters who are going against the city, but as for you, only keep yourselves from the things under the band, so that you do not covet them and take some of them under the band, and make the camp of Israel accursed and bring trouble on it. But all the silver, all the gold, and articles of bronze and iron are holy to the Lord. They shall go into the treasury of the Lord. God is saying to them, I'm giving this land, and it is through this land and the spoils of war that I'm going to provide for you, but I still need you to understand that this provision is based off of your trust in me. Do not take anything you see in the city for yourselves, right? Jericho was an exceedingly rich city. There would have been stuff all around, right? But don't touch it. I can't help but thinking of like Aladdin. You guys know that? Touch nothing but the lamp, right? And you see the little monkey, he's got jewels in his eyes, right? And he's like going after the thing, right? And you know it's going to happen, right? Is he's going to touch something that he's not supposed to. And guess what? Some of the sons of Israel acted unfaithfully. So Joshua 7:1 in regards to the things under the band. For Achan, the son of Carmi, the son of Zabdi, the son of Zerah from the tribe of Judah, took some of the things under the band. Therefore the anger of the Lord burned against the sons of Israel. So Israel was faithful to follow God's instructions about the Battle of Jericho, and they won it, right? This is like the impenetrable city, and they followed God's law to the letter, and they won this amazing battle. The very next battle, after they had taken some things that God told them don't touch, was Ai. And Ai should have been an easy W for the Israelites, and they get their butts handed to them, right? Is that this little tiny army comes out and it routs this huge army. They go off running for the hills. This should have been an easy win for the Israelites, and they didn't. The point of these two stories is, do you trust God for provision and victory as He fights for you on your behalf? This is a point that God will make over and over again throughout Israel's history. He's going to tell them not to amass lots of chariots. Don't go get a lot of horses and chariots, and don't build for yourself a big army, right? I don't want you thinking that your strength is the thing that is like keeping you free and safe. I am the thing that is keeping you free and safe. You have no strength. And y'all, listen to me. We do this all the time. It's up to me or my financial capabilities or my leadership abilities or my creative abilities. It's up to me to fix this relationship. It's up to me to do X, Y, and Z. And so we struggle and fight for success. And here's the deal. The scary part about the battle of Ai is that, the scary part about the battle of Ai is that God just let him go. God knew what it was going to turn out for him, like how it was going to turn out for him. And God was like, hey, you want to do it in your own strength? Go on, man. I will let you do it. I will let you completely exhaust yourself under the strength of your own might. And you let him do it. Some of you are here right now. Some of you walked in and it's work. Maybe it's your marriage. Maybe it's your finances. Possibly you've just reached the end of your rope with your kids. Maybe it's your mental health. Listen to me and don't miss this. The point of this history isn't that you'll approach those issues with better tactics, right? The point of this story is for you to realize that there is no victory apart from God fighting that battle on your behalf. Now look, here's the deal. They didn't just throw their hands up and God no, they had a part to play in this. They absolutely did. But the thing that God was trying to get them to see is dude, don't take a step without me taking the one right in front of you. Trust me in this move, and then trust me in the next move tomorrow, and then trust me in the next thing tomorrow. I've given you a good brain, and I've given you good hands to do good work, but I want you to do that work as you trust me in this. It's this divine partnership that God desires to have with us. Isn't a throw your hands up and, all right, God, you just, Jesus, take the wheel sort of thing, right? And it's like, no, man, you need to keep your hands on thing. Like, He'll steady those hands, right? It's from this point of view that our eyes look to the one who has, had the solution all along. The loss at Ai was unnecessary, like I said, man. Had Achan trusted God, listen to this, not only would he have kept his life, not only would they have found victory at Ai, but like the very next town, the very next battle, Joshua 8. Listen to how that battle ends. Joshua did not withdraw his hand with which he stretched out the javelin until they had utterly destroyed all the inhabitants of Ai. Israel took only the cattle and the spoil of that city as plunder for themselves. Right? Like God was giving them Ai and everything in it. He just wanted to know if they trusted Him in that. Like a couple chapters later, chapter 10, they literally, Joshua has to stop the sun in the sky so that they've got enough time to win against their enemy and collect the spoils of war. And man, Achan, he saw some trinkets and he wanted to go after them. Section 3 is covering chapters 13 through 21, and it's about the allocation of land to the various tribes of Israel. I'm just going to let you know right now, that's rough, right? It's going to be tough for you as you guys make it through there. That's chapters 13 through 21. Just go ahead and mark it. Don't skip it, right? Don't skip it, but I am just letting you know those chapters are going to be work for a few days for you to get through those, right? And here's why. It's describing a map that you've not ever seen before, right? You've never been to this place. And here's what this section is like. If I told you guys to go to the southwest corner of the 40 to where the Henderson property meets the pipeline and walk north to the second clearing and look northeast, you guys tracking? You guys good with that? None of you are good with that, right? But if I told that same thing to anyone on my dad's side of the family, you know what they would do? Dude, they could find that in the dark. They know exactly where to go, and what they're going to find there is an old deer stand of mine that's probably rotted to the ground at this point, I guess. But the point is, they've been there. They know the area, and those words that I just said that mean nothing to you guys. It means people who were there, they get this, right? So for those of you who feel incomplete without a picture, I think I put one up here. Yeah. Okay. Well, it's small, but this is what it looks like. So let's close out this section. I think there's something still really awesome that we're meant to take away from this section. It comes from Joshua 21, 43 through 45. It's the very last words of this section of the allocation of land. Here's what it says. So the Lord gave Israel all the land which He had sworn to give to their fathers, and they possessed it and lived in it. The Lord gave them rest on every side according to all that He had sworn to their fathers, and no one of all their enemies stood before them. The Lord gave all of their enemies into their hand. Listen to this. Underline this. Not one of the good promises which the Lord had made to the house of Israel failed. All came to pass. None of God's promises failed. Man, what a beautiful statement that is. We get it in the form of this picture that we'll miss, but a lot of times because we're not there, we're not tracking that, right? But man, this is big. This was one man, too old to have any kids, and God says, I'm going to make you a nation, and I'm going to give you this land. And you're like, dude, no, you're not. This ain't happening, right? Moses his wife laughed at him. God's like, who are you laughing at, right? And God's like, no, I am. This time next year, I'm going to come back and you're going to have a kid. And He does, man. Over and over again, God shows up and He intervenes in the life of people. And just over this course, it's 400, close to 500 years of history at this point. They're in there now. These promises are coming true. And let me tell you why this is such a big deal. Let's think about what's possible for God for just a second, right? Let's just think. I don't mean what's possible for God? We see God back in, I think it's Genesis 15, 16, 17, 18, somewhere in there, Sodom and Gomorrah, right? God overthrows some inhabitants of the land. How does He do it? He rains down fire and brimstone on them, right? And why didn't He just do that? Why didn't He just tell Abraham, hey, why don't you go stay down in Egypt for a couple of days, and I'm going to clean house, and you come back, and the land's yours, right? Just multiply in the land. Why didn't He do that? Well, I think, one, it would have maybe destroyed some things, but then in Joshua chapter 10, we see God drive them out with hailstones. So He wouldn't have had to have destroyed the land, right? Well, why didn't God just push them out of the land all at once? And I think there's a couple of answers to this. We'll look at both of them. But I think maybe the first and foremost one is that God's promises always involve a process. You know what I mean by that? There are always steps along this journey. God's promises always involve this process. And to take a hold of God's promises without undergoing God's character-shaping process will ruin you. Let's go back to when I was thinking about planting a church like 8 years ago. I had a lot of ideas about what that was going to look like, and I was an idiot. And so I am so glad that I did not just like move up here and do that. That would have ruined it. I would have ruined it, and it would have ruined me. And here's the deal, man. There's like still some things that we haven't encountered here at the Outpost. We're a new church, and just being straight honest with you, there's some things that like we haven't even encountered here at the church. And like, I know that's by the grace of God, because there's things that like I'm not ready for. And we as a church maybe aren't ready for yet, right? And there's just like some things that like God is, like it is a process for this promise that God has given, and to like reach out and take a hold of this promise without undergoing God's character shaping process, man, that can ruin you at the end of the day. This is exactly what God's been doing for 400 years in the Israelite story, right? But it is amazing how quickly we will reach to shortcut God's process to take hold of the blessing and goodness that He has promised. Y'all, I don't let Jack drive. Jack, you in here, buddy? Jack's 13 years old. And am I a bad dad for that? No, I'm actually a really good dad for that, right? Like if I let Jack drive, like what a terrible thing. He's not undergone the development and the growth necessary to be able to drive a vehicle and it not end in his and other people's death, right? Like for me to tell him to hold off, man, you got a few things you need to learn. You got some like motor skills that need to kind of come up a little bit, right? No, actually that makes me a really good dad to not let him drive at this point, right? Remember that as you're waiting on the Lord, man, because I think we get this view of like, well, God promised it, right? God promised it to Abraham. God has promised this or this and this, and man, we're really quick to like reach for the promises of God in the Bible, and there's a 500 different books out there that talk about all these different promises and all these things that God has like said, and we come to sort of expect this thing out of God, and God's like, yeah, man, maybe I made this promise, but like here's the deal, like you've got to undergo the process that shapes your character to be able to handle this thing over time. And then speaking of the process, look at how the book ends. Final section 22 through 24, covering how to keep possession of the land. Now, we just read about how God had given all their enemies into their hand, and then we get this really weird statement in chapter 23. Here's what it is. Chapter 23, we're picking up verse 3. So you've seen all that the Lord your God has done to all these nations because of you, right? So God's brought them in. They've been successful in large part. They've driven these nations out, right? For the Lord your God is He who has been fighting for you, right? We've seen this over and over again in the story, right? And then look what verses 4 and 5 say. See, I have appointed to you these nations which remain. I've appointed to you these nations which remain as an inheritance for your tribes, with all the nations which I have cut off from the Jordan, even to the great sea, toward the setting of the sun. The Lord your God, He will thrust them out before you and drive them out before you, and you will possess their land just as the Lord your God promised you. So, a couple of things. Is this an inconsistency in the Bible? I mean, we literally just read how like all of their enemies were in their hands. Is this a seeming inconsistency in the Bible? No, and we'll talk about why here in a few minutes, right? But I think more strange than that this is part of their inheritance. Inheritance is typically seen as a good thing. So part of the good thing that God was doing for them was to leave some of the nations still in the land. And so here's what's going on. I know you were itching to know, right? I think we're supposed to see Joshua as this like faithful generation. I think a couple of things, right? First, God told the Joshua generation, like all the way back in the book of Exodus, like I'm not going to drive them all out at once because you're not big enough to take a hold of the land, and it's going to grow up and it's going to hair over, and you're not going to be able to take care of it the way that you should. But I think number two, I think we're meant to see this as a test. This is a test for the future generation. Look, there's this younger generation that is watching all of this happen, and they're going to get their own chance one day to choose to submit to God, to trust Him at every step. And God is saying, like, as part of your inheritance, I've left some of these people. I've cut them off from their other nations, all right? Like for the purpose of me showing my faithfulness and showing how I will fight for you to this future generation so that they can learn to trust me the same exact way that you did, right? And so during Joshua's farewell statement, it's like the Zeigernick Effect over again, right? They leave this task that's unfinished and it's begging resolution, and the hope is that they will learn the lesson as they go about doing that, right? And so during Joshua's farewell address to the children of Israel, here's what he says to them. Same exact statement. That's why I had you underline it. Joshua 23, 6-7. He's talking to this next generation that's coming on behind him. It's going to get their chance to either follow God and trust Him or kind of do things their own way. And here's what he says. Be very firm then, to keep and do all that is written in the book of the law of Moses, so that you may not turn aside from it to the right hand or to the left hand. What does that mean? What does it mean to turn to the right hand or to the left hand? And Joshua immediately tells us, so that you will not associate with these nations. These which remain among you, or mention the name of their gods, or make anyone swear by them, or serve them, or bow down to them. Do not turn to the right or to the left. Don't follow the other gods. That is to say, don't look to the other gods to provide the things for you that only the one true God can. And so how does Joshua remind them to do this? You guessed it, man. Joshua 24, 26-28. Joshua wrote these words in the book of the law of God. And he took a large stone and he set it up there under the oak tree, which was by the sanctuary of the Lord. Joshua said to all the people, behold, this stone shall be a witness against us. For it has heard all the words of the Lord which He spoke to us. Thus it shall be for a witness against you, so that you do not deny your God. Then Joshua dismissed the people, each to his inheritance. So that's Joshua. How you guys doing? You guys doing all right? Okay, that was a lot. Let's finish it out with our study concept and our picture of Christ this morning. So today's study concept is not really like anything that we've done up to this point, and it's not really like a study concept as much as it is maybe a piece of wisdom to keep in mind as you read the Bible. And it's really simple. I want you to embrace the hard questions. Embrace the hard questions. Let's just be dead honest. What's the hard question with the book of Joshua? They know? You can talk in church. It's good. Are you going to do what you're told? I think maybe let me say this. What's the hard criticism for the book of Joshua? Anybody know? What's like the overwhelming criticism for the book of Joshua coming in to possess the land? The evil of the land? What's genocide? Thanks, Luke. Appreciate it, buddy. Yeah, that's it. That's the one, man. Hands down, one of the hardest, most like kind of gut-wrenching, like if you haven't stared into that question, really the one that like what gives God the right to essentially commit genocide in the Old Testament, right? And does God still think that way, or whatever the case is? Like anybody heard, show of hands, anybody heard that question come up before? Yeah, okay, quite a few of you guys have. And here's what usually happens is we will avoid like looking into questions like that. What's the answer? What's the answer to that question? And it's not necessarily a simple one. It requires some thought. It requires a little bit of digging. But what we'll do, because we trust in God, if you are a follower of Jesus, like you've maybe been around church for a while, it's like you trust God, and so it's like I'm just going to give God the benefit of the doubt that like there was something, it was that needed to happen, and so we just sort of give God or the Joshua and the Israelites sort of the benefit of the doubt, and we move on and we don't give it any more thought, right? That happens. We become quite dogmatic about that, and the problem with that approach is that there are people who actually do need the answer to that question. And if we stop there, we've not seen it through to actually try to answer that question. You know what I'm saying? It isn't just Joshua, man. These hard questions, these hard things are all over the place, right? I like what John Piper has to say about this question. He says, the way the question is stated doesn't seem to be very hard to me. What gives God the right is that he is God, right? As the creator and sustainer of life, God can give life and he can take it away as he wishes. Today, God will take the lives of 150,000 people, and we don't bat an eye at that unless it's someone that we know. Right? There will be children in that. There will be elderly. There will be young people. There will be people that we perceive to be innocent. There will be people that we perceive to be evil as a part of that 150,000 people. But God, without discretion, takes 150,000 lives today. We don't have any issue with that, right? People in Jesus' day were actually grappling with this question, too. There was a tower that had fell on some people, and they were like, what did they do wrong? Jesus was like, were they any more guilty than anybody else in Israel, right? It's like, just as to say, it doesn't work the way that you think it does. Piper says, no. He said, the way the question is stated isn't very hard. Now, he said, I could make the question harder if you would like. So what makes this question harder is that God commanded Joshua to do it. God commanded sinful, broken people who were still making sinful and messed up choices themselves to do it. So what we'll do is we will hear a criticism, all right, from someone struggling with questions of faith, or maybe even in like open opposition to it, and we will avoid this question, or we will try and we'll like hyper-spiritualize it. Become very dogmatic about things and believe them because that's just how it works, and then we look no further. Anybody ever thought about this question? Like now that I've kind of brought it up, anybody ever like struggled with this? If you don't, or if you haven't, then you've not really looked at the story. Kill everything. Every man, every woman, every child. Don't leave an animal breathing in this city. Go in. Without discretion, it all dies. If that doesn't bother you, you've not looked seriously at it. But when you do a little digging, you find out a few things, right? That's why I say embrace the hard questions, embrace these hard things, and go on the journey. Because in this journey, you're going to see a few things, right? God had actually given the Canaanites 400 years. Y'all, that's older than the nation of the United States. He had given them 400 years to turn back to them. And he didn't expect them to just blindly follow him either. Abraham, he goes to war with some of the kings in the land, and he's coming back. He's bringing his nephew Lot out of this. You guys read this back in the book of Genesis. This is Genesis 15, I think, 14. He's bringing them back out of captivity, and this guy, the king of Salem, named Melchizedek. Salem, we believe, Psalm 93 tells us, is Jerusalem, right? The king of Jerusalem, it says he was a priest to God Most High. It's like, dude, God just had a priest there in the land. He was doing his thing, and we know nothing about him. The book of Hebrews actually picks this little thread up and says, yeah, man, we didn't know a thing about it. But God was working this plan of redemption that we had no idea about, but God was still faithfully working to try to draw this group of people back to himself for 400 years. We just don't get the how. We're just expected to understand that God was somehow sending people to represent him, to try to bring them back and bring them over the edge of destruction, right? Come back. And they didn't do it. If his justice seems harsh, consider what they were doing, actually, at the end of the day. They were offering their children as burnt offerings. Right? And beyond this, they've become so corrupt, like, it was sexual corruption. It was moral corruption. Their justice was completely corrupted. Like, it was so bad that pretty much every future generation after them was doomed. So here's the really hard thing. If you had to like hit the button and kill 100,000 people now, or continue to let them exist for generation after generation with no hope of ever turning back, hundreds of thousands, millions of people, right? Like, I think we have this very temporal view of it. How about this? This is going to blow some of your minds. How about the fact that killing every living thing wasn't actually literal? And I don't mean that I'm opting for a figurative translation of the Bible. I'm meaning that not even the Bible took that statement literally. Later on in the story, next week in the book of Judges, we're going to read that there are people from these nations that were said to be killed that are still alive in the land, right? And if you look at other Near Eastern accounts of battles, that's the language they used to talk about the decisive nature of those battles. There wasn't a thing left breathing, right? That is to say, this victory was so decidedly won, right, that there's no way that they come back from this. It isn't that it isn't literal, it's just not literal in the way that we think of literal, right? It was very literal for them, and it communicated exactly what they wanted it to. We're just not them. We live 3,500 years later, right? So as we think about things as literal, we got to think about how they thought about it. How about the fact that God was acting in a specific period of time with a specific group of people to accomplish these specific goals, right? God is sovereign over people and nature. Like, we don't bat an eye when it's a flood, or maybe we do. That's a pretty rough story too, right? And I think worthy of us like embracing and looking at, right? But here's the deal. God was using Joshua and the people in a very specific time. They were a tool. They were a tool of God's justice and God's wrath, and that doesn't give other people ever, anywhere, at any other point in time in history, like to go on and do what they did. They were just the tool that God was using, and He could have used fire and brimstone, and He did at times. He could have used hail, and He did at times. He even says that He used hornets at times. Like, God was working, but as one of His tools, God used the children of Israel in this specific time. How about the fact that there was still a way of salvation open for anyone who would still turn? Like Rahab, the Gibeonites, right? Like on the eve of battle, the night before she would have been killed, she turns back to God. God still had a way of salvation open for anyone who would turn to Him. Here's the deal. It isn't even that you have to find the answer to these hard questions. The beauty of embracing the hard questions is what the journey will do to you. You see, what the journey of this hard question does is it reveals something to us. It reveals that at its roots, this question is showing our propensity to imbalance the attributes of God's justice and God's mercy and grace. Throw that picture up there, man. That's what I mean. God's love is a balance of these things. Have you ever seen them imbalanced at a church that you've been to or in the theology of somebody that you've been to? And here's the deal, man. It's like we have really jacked up views about what justice and wrath is. And we have really messed up views about what mercy and grace actually is. And so what we will do is we will imbalance these two things to fit our needs or support our way of thinking or make God tribal and for us and against other people. Can I just tell you, that's terrible. You've been to churches that want to emphasize God's wrath and justice before. Those are the aspects of His nature that are highlighted more than others. And so the sermons are all heat and fire and brimstone. They usually get labeled as hard preaching. Let me just tell you, man, that's absolutely unloving. It is not the complete picture of the mercy and grace God displayed through Jesus on the cross. Then on the other side, those whose theology has highlighted grace and mercy to the detriment of God's justice, come as you are and stay that way. No, man. God is holy, and He calls us to be holy as well. Sin has no place in the camp. Ask Achan, right? He would tell you that. No, that's unloving. You can't have one without the other. The problem is that we get a very limited temporal perspective that clouds our view of what true justice and mercy actually look like. And so we redefine what we believe mercy and justice should look like based off of our own judgments, and typically in ways that most benefit us and our tribe. To remake God in our image as we highlight one of these aspects of His character over the other is a form of idolatry, and it is deadly. So I cannot tell you the atrocities in our history that have gone on, with Joshua's picture at its roots, with people who have imbalanced God's view of God's mercy and God's wrath, or God's justice and God's grace, right? Like people who have imbalanced this because it fit their needs. So that is terrible. And here's how it all comes together in the picture of Christ. It's Joshua 5:13 through 15. We get one of the best pictures of Christ that we've gotten so far. Now, when Joshua was near Jericho, he looked up and he saw a man standing in front of him with a sword drawn, and he said, "Man, dadgummit, I wanted to bring a sword today. I didn't have one, but I thought I'd bring my ruler out here. I thought it'd be really good effect, right?" Standing in front of him with his sword drawn in his hand, Joshua went up and he asked him, he said, "Are you for us or for our enemies?" What he said, "Neither," he replied. "But as commander of the army of the Lord, I have now come." Then Joshua fell face down to the ground in reverence and asked him, "What message does my Lord have for his servant?" The commander of the Lord's army replied, "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy, and Joshua did so. Now, Joshua asks a very legitimate question on the eve of battle, right? You meet some dude in the road, and he's got a sword out. You one of ours, or you one of theirs? And you see what he said? He said, neither. And here's how we know. This is what's known as a theophany. This is an appearance of God in the Old Testament, right? Or Christophany is also called that sometimes, right? Because he tells them to do something that only God can tell them to do, right? He says, take off your shoes because you're on holy ground. Look at me. You don't do that for angels, okay? Like, they're terrifying, and real biblical angels would scare half of us to death, right? But John the Revelator actually tries to bow down. He's there at the end of history, and this angel's been showing him around, and he tries to bow down and worship this angel. This guy's like, whoa, dude, you're going to get us both in trouble. Don't do that, right? Stand up. I'm a servant just like you, right? And he's like, don't do that, right? But Joshua bows face down in front of this guy, takes off his shoes. Here's what's happening in this moment. There are two groups of people standing before God in this moment. Two groups of people that God has been working in both of their stories for over 400 years to draw them to Himself that they might find grace and mercy and life. One group, the Israelites, have turned to God in repentance, albeit reluctantly, right? And this story comes right at the tail end of the circumcision story, where they have just shown their devotion and their submission to God in this very physical, gruesome act, right? They have turned back to God, right? The other group, the Canaanites, stand at His back, having rejected God's call of salvation through grace and mercy, and are now about to experience God's justice and wrath. Here it is, man. The gospel is pictured as this equation between mercy and justice that we choose to balance as we either submit to God or reject His offer of salvation. Here's what I mean, man. We see this in the two comings of Christ. Jesus came once, and He offered grace and mercy as He absorbed the justice and wrath that was due us. You get to choose that if you so choose, right? You get to choose to accept the free offer and the extension of salvation that was given to you as God absorbed the wrath and the justice that was due you. But He's also coming again. And this time, He is coming to bring justice and wrath against all of those who have rejected that free offer, grace and mercy. Now, here's the deal, man. Make no mistake. That equation will balance one day. It will. And you will stand on one of two sides on it with Jesus on the other. Joshua portrays our response perfectly. Take off your shoes in humility, bow in submission to Jesus as we accept the free gift of salvation, and live a life that ratifies that decision by turning away from the things that God has judged against. I don't know where you're at, man. I don't know where you walked in here at today, but maybe it's in hearing this for the very first time. And you can do that right where you're sitting. There's no magic prayer. There is no special words, man. It's God to God. I'm sorry for the ways that I've defined good and evil for myself. I'm sorry for the ways that I've ran my own life. God, forgive me. Thank you for your offer of mercy and grace. Or you cannot. That's totally up to you. And here's the good deal, is God does not force anyone's hand. But just know that at the end of the day, this isn't a threat. This isn't hard preaching. This is just how God lays it out to us very lovingly and with room to respond. The equation will balance. Justice isn't really justice without mercy and grace to balance it out. And mercy and grace aren't really mercy and grace without justice and wrath on the other side of it. So I don't know where you're at, but I would love to have that conversation with you. You guys doing all right? It's Book of Joshua. What do you guys think? All right? Pretty good? I think our kids are getting rowdy back there, so let's close it out. Father God, we love you and we praise you. Thank you for this opportunity to come to your house to worship you again this week. Father, we just thank you for this beautiful picture of the gospel, Just thank you for this beautiful picture of mercy, and grace, and justice, and wrath that is there setting up the beautiful story of Jesus. Father, I pray that we would respond in kind to this as you would have us to. Father, I pray that we would be a faithful people as we help other people along their journey of faith. Pray that you would open up the door for gospel conversations this week as we serve you in our jobs, on the baseball fields, the grocery store. Father, we love you and we praise you. We thank you for Jesus. Also, we ask in his name. Amen. All right, guys. You have a great week.